Hey guys, welcome back to another update. Today we're going to focus on the skeleton on the cross. And I hope these updates aren't too frequent. I, I think it's important to share with everybody and show everyone the process, the steps that are involved in getting these pieces ready to be shipped out to everybody. And in the first couple updates, we focused on the empty cross. The skeleton on the cross, for obvious reasons, it takes a little bit more time to paint. There's just so many more steps involved. And by the way, if again, I apologize if I sound a little strange or if I need to pause sometimes in the video because I'm still trying to get over my whatever I have. So if you notice pauses in the video, that's the reason why. But the skeleton on the cross takes more time to paint because of all the little bits involved. And here the first step is to paint all the wood bits. This is after the initial base coat of the white, which we used a flat white and paint primer all in one. And a question might come up and say, well, how come you just didn't paint this, the base coat in brown? Well, we did that for the empty cross because the major or primary color was brown. It was just a empty cross. So we did that with that piece, and that worked out good for that particular piece. It saved time and a lot of steps, not going back and painting all the wood bits. The only thing we had to do on the empty cross was paint the well, for the wood anyways, was paint the highlight color. But for this, we painted the base color of white because of the skeleton. We didn't want to have to go back and paint all the skeleton or the bone bits. We thought it was easier to go and just paint all the wood bits, because with the skeleton being the main focus, we don't go back and paint the bone bits at all, outside of adding a brown dry brush or a brown wash and then a black wash. We don't go in and paint any of the bone bits at all. So it saves time not having to go back and do that. So here you see that I'm using a fairly thick or a fairly large brush to do all the wood bits. That's because there is a fairly large amount of wood bits to cover. And using this brush, I can still get into all the, or most of the little detail areas. Now I'm being careful not to get the brown on any of the skeleton bits. So I'm being careful not to do that so I don't have to go back and fix any mistakes later. Now this wood, because it's a darker color and it's going on a white background or base coat, I have to put 2 coats of brown on the all the wood bits. So I do this by painting the wood in segments. And so I just remember what I paint first, and then that gives the brown enough time to dry that by the time I go back and paint the second coat, it's dry enough that it the paint adheres to the first coat of brown. And if you don't let the paint dry enough between coats, sometimes what happens is that as you're trying to paint over a second coat, it will remove the first coat, or parts of it anyways, and the base coat will start to show up. So this is one of the most tedious processes of painting these crosses is just the wood. There's just so much of it. But that's just with anything that you paint, though. You're gonna have tedious processes that you just gotta get through it and make sure that everything looks good. So you can see here I'm getting into the little tiny crevices, even with this large brush. And there's sometimes I get some of the wood paint color on the pants, but that's okay, because when I go back and I paint the pants, then I cover up those little small mistakes. And if you're unfamiliar with painting miniatures, or you want to start painting miniatures, but you think it's just a daunting task, painting miniatures is just it's steps. You just do it in steps. And so, like, the first step that I did for this particular miniature was the wood bits. It's the largest color that I need to paint. And because I do it in steps or layers, if I make some tiny mistakes and get it on, his pants, or maybe his shirt, that will be fixed in the later steps. So it's not that big of a deal. Now it would be a problem if I got the wood on the bony bits, because then I would have to go back and touch it up. So I'm extra careful not to get it on any of the white bits. But even if I did, and the brown wash and then the black wash, you're not going to notice those little tiny mistakes. So if you're just starting out painting miniatures, or you think it might be too difficult, one thing that I would just recommend is it's just practice. And as you paint more, you'll get better at it. And apologize here, and sometimes my camera gets out of focus, and that's partly because I don't have the miniature in front of the camera, so sorry about that. But painting miniatures is just a process and different steps involved in painting, and you'll find your own technique, you'll find your own way of painting, but I really enjoy painting. It's I guess it's therapeutic for me in a way, and it's fun to see. It's sort of like just an empty canvas, and it's fun to see. You take this, for example, in the skeleton, it's just a white canvas, and it's fun to see what you can achieve, or what you can achieve by adding some color to this piece, and how cool it can look at the end. It's and the great thing too about painting miniatures is that you can paint it any color you want, so it's pretty cool. So here I'm adding a dry brush of a lighter brown to all the wood bits. I'm doing that just because this is just such a large part of the piece, and I just wanted to add some variance in the wood color itself, because you find that in nature, right? When you look at a piece of wood, generally it's not one color. It's going to be multiple colors. And so I added this lighter color, and I'm being pretty liberal with it. You could call it a dry brush, but it's a heavy dry brush, and it brings out all the little wood grain and just makes it look more natural, like a piece of wood would look. Wood has different colors of browns, and that's what I was going for. All right, so on to the some of the fun bits, is painting his pants. And if you read the description or the update on the Kickstarter, we changed the painting scheme a little bit on the skeleton. If you go back and look at the pictures in the Kickstarter, you can see that this the skeleton guy, he really has a lot of dark tones. He has a dark shirt and almost a black pants, really dark gray. And this piece already has darker tones. The wood, even though it's a lighter wood color, it's still on the darker side. And then the base, which is a big portion of the piece, it's a darker tone. It's a dark charcoal. And so I was looking at the piece, and it was really just everything was blending together. And it wasn't an interesting piece, in my opinion, to look at. I was like, man, I got to add some color to this guy. So I thought, some lime green pants will look good. So that's what I did. I gave him some lime green pants, and I think it goes well with the piece after the the initial washes, the brown wash, and then the black wash that I put over it. It tones down that bright green, his bright green pants. And that's something too to always remember when you're painting. If you're painting, or if you pick a color and you start painting, you're like, oh wow, man, this is really bright. Remember that anything that you put a wash over, that color is going to be toned down quite a bit. And so that's something that that's something that happened with the skeleton prior to changing the painting scheme for his pants and also for his shirt. Is that there was dark tones on top of dark tones, and then you add a dark wash, and it made his dark brown shirt and his dark charcoal color pants even darker. And so painting miniatures, it's good to have some contrasts and to give the miniature some focal points and some splash of color. Now, I didn't want the colors to be too crazy, too over the top. I mean, you could say lime green pants, yeah, that's over the top. But once you add the wash, I think it works. And the skeleton, obviously, he's been up on this cross for quite a while, so that's why his shirt is barely there, and he has a few holes in his pants. And so when I'm painting this lime green, I have to be really careful to not paint any of the bone bits. So that's why you notice the difference between when I used a larger brush for the wood bits, using a much smaller brush for painting his pants, because it's more detailed work, and it's better not to make any mistakes by painting in this case, any of the wood bits lime green and going back and fixing it. So it's better to use a smaller brush and be a little slower and more detailed in what you're painting. Now here I'm moving on to painting his shirt, or what's left of it. There's not a whole lot of his shirt left. It's pretty tattered and beat up. When we sculpted this piece, we were going for, obviously it's a skeleton on a cross, so he's been there for a while, but initially we didn't have a shirt on him. So we went back and we added a tattered, torn up shirt, and we thought it worked. And also it's another way to add some a different color than to have an all white skeleton just on a cross. It's just another way that we could give it some color and some variety to the piece to make it a little bit more interesting to look at. And and again, here I'm using a little more detailed brush than I did with painting the wood bits. His shirt is, of course, laying on his bones, so I have to be real careful not to paint any of the bone bits blue. And this takes a little bit more time, painting his pants, and then his shirt takes a little bit more time, just because you got to figure out, okay, where's the shirt start, and where does the bone bits end. And it's when everything's white, it can be kind of difficult to see. So generally, what I did anyway for this piece is I tried to start with an outline first. Okay, I see the outline of the shirt, so I start painting the outline, and then that helps me figure out where the rest of the shirt bits are on the skeleton. So next is painting the base. And so this goes fairly quickly. It's just a dark charcoal for the base. And, the only bits that I really got to worry about is making sure I don't paint his feet. Because that would be kind of tedious to go back there and fix that mistake. So, I just real careful to make sure to not paint his feet. So the next step is going through and painting all of the shackle bits. And initially I used a light gray for this, and I realized that it wasn't enough contrast between the skeleton bits. So I switched over to using a darker gray, and it was a much better contrast between the white bony bits. And that's okay. Sometimes when you're painting and you're like, well, I mean, that doesn't look good. Or if I paint this a different color, it will look even better. And that's okay. That's the cool thing about painting, is that you can make any adjustments. And I wouldn't necessarily call them mistakes. I would just um, call it um, you know, making changes. And sometimes you don't realize, or you don't know how it's going to look until you start painting. And it's kind of like with this skeleton. When we initially did the initial um, prototypes, we used all dark tones. But when I went back to start painting the skeleton again, I'm like, yeah, man, this piece, it doesn't look all that great. It needs some contrast, it needs some color. And so we changed it. We added the lime green pants and the blue shirt. And now there's that contrast. It's a more interesting piece to look at. It just doesn't blend together. And that's with the shackles, realize that, oh, wow, it needs to be a darker gray. And it only took me 2 pieces to realize that. And that's okay. It was a simple fix, and in a simple adjustment. And in the finished product, it looks much better, because you can see that contrast of where the bone bits are and where the shackles are. What we don't want is to have the shackles and the bone bits to be almost the same color, because then you don't have that contrast. And here, this is also where I made an adjustment. Initially, I started going in and painting the chain and the shackle bits that are on the, or the chain bits that are on the base. I started adding the highlights of gray. But then, to save time, I realized that I could do this when I go back and add the dry brush of a light gray on the base. So that's another adjustment that I made to speed up the painting process. And again, that's the fun part of painting miniatures, is that you can paint this skeleton hundreds of different ways and have different looks to this one piece. And that's the joys of painting. It's fun. So here you can see I'm doing the dry brush of a light gray on the base. And again, this is where adding contrast comes in. I didn't want to just leave the base a dark charcoal look, because it would be dull, boring, there's no contrast. And so that's why going in and adding this light gray dry brush really brings out the different variations and the textures in the base that you wouldn't see if I didn't add this this dry brush of light gray. And this is also where I started going in and highlighting the chains that connect to the shackles, and this saved me some time. Thank you for watching this update, and there'll be more updates to come.